Greetings, everyone. My name is Paul Epner. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and the co-founder of the Society to Improve Diagnosis in Medicine. We're very excited that more than 200 people have registered for this conference, and that the more are still joining even as we get started here. The slides and this conference will be archived and available for later download. We have about a half hour's worth of prepared remarks where we're going to walk you through the program, and I'm going to review the agenda for you right now. I will be joined by SIDM's Quality Improvement Program Manager, Deanna Ruse, who will come on a little later. I will also be joined by Suze Schrant, our Senior Patient Engagement Advisor. Please make sure you have muted your phones so that we don't hear any background noise. If you have questions during the course of the meeting, feel free to you should enter them into the chat box. We will hopefully get a chance to address them during the meeting, but if not, we will address them afterwards. If your name is showing up in when you entered as someone else's name, and you have asked a personal question, you can right-click that name and change it to your name. At that point, we will know who's asking the question. We'll have an accurate list. Okay, the one last thing is when you want to ask a question, please don't ask about a specific intervention and you want to know if it's a good idea or a bad idea. Those kinds of questions we won't answer, and you probably don't even want them answered publicly anyway. If it's a great idea, you may get other people taking it. So let me get started. Again, we're going to review at a high level the Seed Grant Program. We are going to then go into some of the elements of the application. We're not going to go by any means through a line by line of how to fill out the application. When Deanna talks, she'll refer you to some of the online resources that will give you line by line instructions, but we will talk more generally about them. And then we'll end up, resources and important dates and questions. We've had some submitted questions already before us, and we will address those for sure. And then additionally, if we have time, and we expect we will, questions you've included in the chat box will be answered as well for as long as we have time. Let me get going. So first, who's eligible for this program? And even before I describe eligibility, let's maybe describe the program at a very high level. We will be awarding 20 or more grants per year for the next 3 years. We're right now in the first year, the first cohort. There is a limit of $50,000 per grant. If people ask for less than $50,000, in theory, we could have 21 or 22 grants because we have $1 million to disseminate to the field. But we're expecting that most of the grants will come in at a $50,000 level, and so therefore we're assuming we will award about 20. The key element for eligibility is this notion of a care delivery system. You certainly can have partners. They can be for-profit partners. They can be patient safety organizations, other kinds of professional societies. You can have a lot of different partners. That's totally up to you. But we will only do a gift to the grant, to the care delivery system. We think we've captured most of them on this list. If we're missing something, there is an opportunity in the application for you to specify a different description than what we're showing on this slide, but this is where we expect most of them will be. We've had several questions about international applicants. We know that how interventions work are often influenced by the health system, whether it be the reimbursement or the mechanism for referrals or other mechanisms. And so we think interventions are very specific often to the country where they're being tested. This is designed to serve the US healthcare system. If you're an international location and you wish to submit, you are welcome to. You will need to demonstrate in your application that your intervention will be applicable in the US. And if it's not applicable here, then it will be rejected. Let's go to the next slide. The kind of interventions, this is about quality improvement. This is not about pure research or anything related to that. So we expect all of the submissions to fit one of these four categories. Either you have a well-defined, and maybe let me skip the first one and come back to it. You go to the second one, a well-defined intervention that will be tested and improved using PDSA cycles or using the Lean Six Sigma tools or some other tools, but you've got an intervention, you're going to put it into practice, you're going to collect information, and then you're going to try to improve that intervention. That's the second bullet point. That's certainly the sweet spot of this grant. You may already have an implemented intervention that you really never collected good data on. And so if you want to take an already implemented but unevaluated intervention and evaluate it and also look at improving it through that evaluation process, that's also a great example for the third bullet. Or if you have an implemented intervention that you know works, you've already evaluated, but now you want to move it to a different hospital, a different setting, or try it with a different population, that also works. Some people have asked, what about if we don't know what the intervention is yet? We have a very well characterized problem or very well recognized problem, but not well characterized. Can we do some discovery work? Sure, you can do discovery work. That can't be the goal of the activity, but you can certainly do some discovery work for a while, collect baseline data, and then define your intervention. But in your application, you will have to be able to show that you really have a good sense of where you're going. The discovery period would be very limited in time, and you need to be able to be in a data collection mode probably for 6 of the 12 months. Here's some examples of what we would call a qualifying submission. You know, if you're addressing cognitive issues, you might want to use checklists or clinical decision support tools. These are just examples to be able to then try them out, figure out if they're helping, and then improve those tools. Or if you're addressing systematic failures, you could certainly look at using tools like reminder systems or looking at test results pending a discharge, and say you're going to try rewriting the way the discharge summary is done or the communications, or even an educational intervention where you're going to look at changes in practice and the outcomes from that educational intervention. All of those things would work. What wouldn't work are the 3 examples here, where one is that you're just doing some kind of an epidemiologic study or just trying to understand root causes with nothing coming beyond that. Alternatively, the second bullet point, just doing something in a lab setting with no patient, not actually trying to improve a clinical process and collecting real data with real patients. It's just in a simulation setting. Or 3, you're just doing some kind of a biomarker analysis. What's the sensitivity or specificity? What's the predictive, positive predictive value of a new test? Those kinds of things are not what we're trying to do, and would not generally either they would be disqualified or receive a low score. We are doing an allocation of awards, so we want 50% of the awards to go against what we're calling or what David Newman-Toker in his research called the big three, which are acute vascular events, infections, or cancers. This research article that's referenced here and available at our website is critically important to review if you think you're going to go after a big three category. We expect to award 50% of the 20 awards, so approximately 10 or more, used for people who have self-selected themselves into the big three category. Now, in the application where it says, are you submitting for this category? If you select yes, but then your protocol is very generic, we're going to close the loop on all test results and we're going to look at all diagnoses, that's not going to be probably qualified. If, on the other hand, please everyone mute your phones. There's some background noise. Thank you. If you, on the other hand, are going to look at, say, incidental findings, trying to address lung cancer as an example, and your outcomes reflect on that, then that certainly does qualify for the big three. We also have a category for disparity research or disparity quality improvement, and there are articles out there that you can find easily that talk about disparities and how they affect diagnosis. And then the third of them will be given, of the awards will be given to things that are in neither of those two categories. Now, people have asked, what if will we go down to lower quality proposals in order to make these allocations? I'd say if there are a broad category of applications with approximately the same quality score, we will certainly draw from the target categories until at least we hit our minimum. We will not go deep down in lower quality in order to meet these allocations. If we don't get the right allocations this year, it's certainly possible that next year we may have a different requirement where we would only accept in these categories, A or B. But anyway, this year we're just going to see what comes in, but there will certainly be preferential allocations against disparities and the big three. I want to just finish up my section by talking about some of the required components of the application. Deanna will talk more about the meat of the application later. We want to make sure that if you are doing this, not if, in the care delivery system that you're doing this in, that you don't run into organizational issues with trying to carry it out. So we are looking for a senior level and executive sponsor who will confirm specific things, and this letter must be appended to the application when you submit it. We're being very prescriptive about the things we care about. It gives us a sense of the feasibility, the risk of your not being successful. And so these are the things we expect to see in that letter. If there are elements of them missing from the letter, that would be a disqualifying submission then. So it's just follow this pattern and make sure the executive sponsor you have has addressed them, and that won't be a problem. The budget is not a big detailed budget, and it just has mainly a dollar amount in various categories. But again, it's an indicator to us as to whether you are thinking about the resource requirements that you will need and whether you've allowed for them. If you have a very data intensive application and we don't see in other personnel either purchase time from a computer department, an informatics department, or time for a person on the core team, we might start to wonder about that. And it might reduce the score a little, but we're not going to do a deep dive on budgets. That's not one of the critical components of this. If your system requires indirects, know that they are limited by our grantor to 12.5% of the direct budget. And in no case, whether you use indirects or no indirects, the total cannot exceed $50,000. I'm now going to turn it over to Deanna to talk a little bit about the main elements of the application and the scoring criteria. Deanna, can you unmute yourself? Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Paul said, I'll spend a little bit of time just talking to you about essentially what are we looking for in the application itself, and then how does that translate into the scoring criteria that our review process will undertake. So as you can see on your slides here, really the four main categories of the application are around aims, background, and approach, project plan, organizational rationale, and then risks and risk mitigation. So for those of you that have yet to look at the application, or maybe have started an application but haven't really completed it or looked at it thoroughly, what you should expect from these categories, specifically around aims, background, and approach, is an opportunity for you to essentially describe your aim. So what is it that you are proposing this project will accomplish in the timeline that you will later discuss in the proposal itself? We're looking to really see what is the problem, what is the background? So what is the rationale around why you've picked this problem? What is the magnitude of that issue that you're trying to address? And then finally, what is the intervention? So what is the solution you're looking to test? What is the tool you're looking to either develop or do some more exploratory work around? In the project plan itself, we're really looking at methodology. So we want you to dig deep and tell a story about the population that your intervention will affect. Describe how your intervention will either be tested or improved. We want to know a little bit about your measurement strategy. So how will you measure the effectiveness, of your intervention? And then finally, have you thought about the negative consequences? So what are the unintended negative consequences? What are the balancing measures you'll put in place to ensure that there aren't some negative downstream effects of the work that you'll be doing here? In the organizational rationale section, what you should expect, and really what we're looking for there, is your team. So we want to know who are you bringing together, who is at the table. We want to know whether or not you have the right team members, and we can talk about that a little bit later, because that is one question that we've received so far around component of the team. Who are we looking to assess in that team member composition? And then finally, when we look at risks and risk mitigation, it's again, have you thought about data and data requirements? What sort of data will you need access to, and what are the systems you're putting in place to ensure that you'll have access to that data? And then finally, are there any sort of challenges or barriers you anticipate that you might come up against? And finally, how will those be addressed? So I'm going to hand this over to Suze, who will talk to you a little bit more about meaningful patient and family engagement. But before I do that, I also want to draw your attention to this screenshot on the slide here, which is, as you can see, very similar to the scoring criteria that I mentioned our peer reviewers will use when they're looking at your applications. You can actually access this from our website. And so if you visit the SIDM website and you go to the Seed Grant Program page, you can get a look at what the scoring criteria actually will be looking at. So under each one of those categories, aims, background, project plan, organizational rationale, risks, and risk mitigation, there are specific questions that all of our peer reviewers will be using to assess your submissions. So let me hand it over to Suze now, who will talk to you about meaningful patient-family engagement.
And I made, so this is Paul again. Let me, before we hand it off to Suze, and Suze, you need to enter the PIN number that was sent to you so I can unmute you. I think that's the challenge. But let me also draw attention on this slide to the notion of de-identified, and that's by 3 bullet points. In order to be able to ensure a fair review, we don't want the reviewers to know the identity of the organization. So Deanna will talk a little bit more about the review process in a couple minutes, but we do need to know identifiable information in the organizational rationale, and there will be some demographic areas of the application which will of course have identifiable information. But in the aims, background and approach, project plan, and risk mitigation, we're asking you to keep identification information out of there in order to be able to distribute that to reviewers and ensure an unbiased and fair assessment. Okay, so let's go on and see. Suze, are you able to unmute yourself? I cannot do that. I think we're having a problem with Suze being able to unmute herself. So what I may do is, Suze, take your slides unless you can figure out how to get online. So let me at least start the process, and if she can come on later, we'll make that work. So first thing, in the application, there is an element around patient engagement. And SIDM is a big believer that healthcare will be improved if patients are engaged, not as just make them better patients, but if they're involved in all of our quality improvement, research, and educational efforts. We do ask that people describe how they are using patients in the design and planning of their project. If whoever has a dog could mute their phone, that would be great. Thank you. So we are asking you to describe that. Now, there might be examples where a patient involvement would really not add much value because of the unique protocol or the intervention that's being contemplated. And in that case, we are going to ask you to justify that there is no benefit to be obtained from patients. But the default should be to include patients in your initial thought process, the design, the protocol development, and the execution of your project. Let me go to the next slide. And these are the slides I won't know as much about as Suze would, but so the question here is about, what is it? It's involving the patients from your target community as partners in the project. And pretty much what I said, they can co-create with you, they can troubleshoot any recruitment challenges, they can identify certainly from an outcomes perspective how patients may look at things and what kind of language might be most effective and if you're collecting information from patients. So they can add a lot of value, and you should engage them where you can. This slide, so this is where I'm going to struggle on this one. And Suze, oh, it looks like now I can maybe unmute you. Suze, you are unmuted. Try it.
Can you hear me? Oh,
yes.
Good. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, everybody. Just in time. I can start with the example. So thanks, Paul, for leading us in. I apologize, everyone, for my technological difficulties. So real quickly, just so it's clear that this whole construct of patient engagement, one of the most important definitional pieces to remember is that the historical context around the term patient engagement usually implies patients being engaged in their own care and in their own disease management. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about inviting patients to, quote, the other side of the curtain. So this is about working with patients as colleagues, as advisors, as partners to really shape and carry out your project. And there's actually quite a large evidence base now supporting the impact of this type of patient engagement, primarily in patient-centered outcomes research, things funded by PCORI, but also in medical product development, and really throughout the entire healthcare landscape. Some of the most tangible and instructive examples I have are not in the diagnostic space, but you'll be able to see how they very easily translate to quality improvement and diagnosis. So first I want to start with this top unpredictive technology example. This was a predictive technology tool that was intended to alert both patients and clinicians of a pending disease flare in conditions like rheumatoid arthritis or other inflammatory arthropathies. But the challenge was that it was created without patients, and it really relied on the context of a healthy person to determine problem behaviors. So meaning if the patient was moving around less or sleeping more, those were deemed to be the warning signs and sort of the predictors of a flare or a disease exacerbation. But in reality, many patients have worsening sleep or insomnia when their diseases worsen. They may actually move around more because it's difficult to find and maintain a comfortable position. So if you think about this in a diagnostic context, it would be imperative that the symptomology a tool or a protocol is intended to capture is co-designed with patients so that you're flagging accurate warning signs and not what a healthy person might imagine the warning signs to be. The second example is from the data analysis portion of a project, and I have found that overwhelmingly, this is the part that's sort of hardest for people to wrap their brains around. How could patients be involved in data analysis? They're not necessarily trained in data analysis. They're not trained in QI or other science domains, but actually the lens they provide is critical. And this example is quite simple. This was an analysis of a whole bevy of data. I won't get into too much detail, but the idea was to determine whether an intervention had led to less pain in a cadre of patients. And so the keywords they were using were pain and derivatives of the word pain, you know, painful, etc. And it yielded much fewer hits than the team expected. So if they worked with the patient partners, they could see that often chronic pain patients use words like discomfort, or in my disease and rheumatoid arthritis, we say things like our joints are angry or cranky, or that it's an irritation or a frustration. That yielded a much larger expanse of accurate data. It's really the patient partners that can provide that layer of sort of lived context to the analysis and the interpretation of data. And you can imagine quite easily how that would play out in a diagnostic context if you needed to understand whether something was really working and what those true patient outcomes were. And then lastly is an example from a comparative study looking at, in this case, it was the effectiveness of a disease management tool in asthma. There was a survey intended to assess the outcomes from the tool, asking the patients how many days of work or days of school they had missed as a result of an asthma exacerbation. But the patients explained that if they responded to that survey, they would say none. They didn't miss a day of work or a day of school, which in no way would have captured their health outcomes. They were having horrible exacerbations of disease, but they said they missed an hour here or 2 hours there, or they were zombies and unproductive at work because they've been in the ER with their children all night. So the tool in its initial form would not have only been incomplete, it would have yielded inaccurate data. And if you apply this in a diagnostic quality improvement context, whether it's about a method for more accurate review of symptoms and ascertaining histories, or if it's just about designing how you're going to capture patient outcomes from whatever your QI initiative is, those patient partners can assure that you are capturing what you intend to capture, and you're really building tools anchored in the reality of the patient experience versus some approximation of what that experience might be. So I think at this point, I turn it back over to you, Deanna, and I apologize again for my technological difficulties.
Thank you, Suze. So a few last considerations for you as you begin or continue or wrap up your applications. And the first one is you will note that at the end of the application, there is an acknowledgement statement. And essentially, once you click that you've acknowledged that statement, you essentially are confirming or agreeing to some of those conditions. And one of those is really around the issue of external funding. We do ask that you do confirm that acknowledgement statement that no additional external funding is available to do this work. So essentially what this means is we are not looking to fund smaller parts of a larger research effort. meaning you've started this project elsewhere, you've received funding for this project from other funders, and are now looking to carve out a small piece that this grant will fund. So that's the first condition we wanted to make you aware of. Secondly, we wanted to address the issue of IRB because we know that that has come up in the past. We know that traditionally QI projects should not require IRB approval, so we do not anticipate that this will be a big issue. However, it is up to the applicant to determine what your system's requirements are, since you know how to navigate that process best. If IRB approval is required, we will not grant funding until IRB issues are resolved. So please just be aware of that. Make sure that you do give yourself enough time to work with your system and navigate that process if you believe that your intervention requires IRB approval, or if your IRB believes that your intervention requires IRB approval. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier on, there is an opportunity in the application for you to list out the different members of your QI team. We will be paying attention to the composition of that team. So for example, if it appears that your intervention is heavily IT related, if you're looking to do something around health IT, if you're looking to work with your health IT department, however, there doesn't appear to be IT input either in your team composition, nor have you discussed that elsewhere in the application, that raises a question for us on our end, because we do not know how you plan to engage those meaningful stakeholders. So those are the three conditions I wanted to make sure we go over. I also want to spend a little bit of time around what happens once you have been granted the proposal. So the first requirement is really around a kickoff webinar. So at that point, we want to make sure that you have, and these dates will be made available, of course, in advance, but we want to make sure that you can attend that kickoff webinar, which really sets the stage for the rest of the project. We will also require bi-monthly status reports, and I do want to spend a little bit of time here clarifying what those status reports contain. It is by no means a data report. It is by no means a 10-page dissertation on where you are in your project. It is at most 3-4 questions around what have you learned due to the latest testing cycle you undertook, or whatever step you might be in your discovery process that month. It will be around what challenges, what barriers did you encounter this month, and then finally, what were your key lessons, what were your key takeaways, and how will those inform what you do the following month, either your next PDSA or how you might have modified your project plan. We also will need a formal mid-project and year-end final report that will be closer to more pages than 2. So we do anticipate that we will provide guidance for sure, either a template or specific questions to you in advance to know what to expect from those reports, but just please expect them to be a little more complex than these monthly status reports. And then finally, we'll need, and we'll provide the schedule, we'll need to have participation in our quarterly calls. We'll also have an online community, which I will moderate, and that will be really an opportunity for us to engage in some of this peer-to-peer learning. It will be an opportunity for us to ask questions of one another, talk about any barriers we might encounter, list some lessons we think might be helpful for the rest of the cohort. And then finally, we do require attendance at 2 designated QI summits at future SIDM international conferences. So next slide, please. This is really the review process, which you'll see here. There's not a lot of detail provided because we have different steps that will be undertaken before we make that decision. Essentially, what one can expect is there will be a SIDM technical review, which will be handled internally by our staff here. We will then send that over to round 1 of peer review. There will then be a round 2 of peer review if needed. We don't know at the moment how many applications we actually will receive. But the point, the main takeaway from the slide is essentially the grant review committee in-person meeting is where we will bring all of our reviewers together, and essentially that's the finalist round. By the end of that in-person meeting, we will walk away with our 20 or so grantees. The review process will, as I've said, undergo multiple phases, but everyone will be made aware of a decision by June 5th. So although these different phases will take place at different times throughout the next few months, everyone will receive a decision at the same time. So one should not worry if a few weeks have gone by and you've submitted an application and you don't know exactly what round you've made it onto. We will not be sending out those types of answers. So finally, we get to our resources slide, and I just wanted to include some screenshots of materials that you should access, can access already. The first screenshot on the left is what the RFP looks like. If you have not accessed it or seen it yet, I invite you to do that. You can download it on our website, and the link is up there. The second important document is the frequently asked questions, which again, also available for you to download on our website. It has some of the questions that we can highlight a little bit later on, but also some questions that I think will be really important for you to consider as you begin to put together your proposal. And then I think next, I think there's one more document. There we go. This is the grant application instructions guidelines. So essentially, for those of you that do your own taxes and you go online and you download your instructions guide on what exactly each question is asking or is requiring of you, that is what this document is. Again, you can download that on our website. Next slide, please. So just wanted to mention this here. These dates, you probably see them everywhere in all of our documents, also on the program website, but I wanted to mention them here. Please note the application deadline is March 30th, 2020 of this year. We will make an announcement by June 5th, and then we expect that very first cohort to kick off and begin their project June and wrap up May 2021. Next slide, please. We also wanted to take a moment here and thank the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation for making all of this possible. This definitely would not have been happening at the moment had it not been for GBMF, so we thank you for making this possible for us. Next slide. So now we get to the questions portion, and I do have two more important notes before we open it up. I think Paul has some questions he's already received that we wanted to address. First of all, we know and we've been made aware that some of you are calling in and do not have access to a computer, so you haven't been able to actually type in your questions. If that is the case and you do have a burning question that we have not yet addressed or will not address by the end of this webinar, please go ahead and email us at this website with anything, again, that either has come up during this webinar that you haven't had an opportunity to ask of us, or maybe afterwards, once you've processed this information and have thought of anything else. That is the email you should be using for all questions moving forward. The second important note I want to make here is we do ask that you do send your questions until February 26th. After that date, we will no longer accept questions. So what this means is please get to us as soon as possible, because we will then commit to having answers to these questions made public on our website by March 2nd. So I think that wraps it up for me. Paul, let me hand it over back to you so you can address some of the questions we've already received, and then depending on time, we can address some of the questions that we got in the chat box.
Great, thank you, Deanna, and feel free. I think we addressed many of the questions that were submitted in advance. If you want to interject with any, you can. I also can go quickly through there's quite a few that came in the chat box, so I will just start working through those very quickly. So one, as I think I already chatted back to everyone, yes, this entire presentation with both the audio and the images will be posted at the website and available later. There was a question about whether startups are eligible. Again, you need to be working with an academic medical center where it is likely the intervention would be tested, and they need to be the one to submit, and you certainly can participate. There was a question about whether a contracted specialty group such as radiology, emergency medicine, etc., could be included. And again, yes, they definitely could be included. In this case, we might actually say if you're working with multiple care delivery systems and you want to be the one to submit it, in that case, that's okay. It's an extension of a care delivery system. Our main goal is to make sure that the people who are submitting actually are able to be involved in the intervention testing within a care facility. Another question, am I saying organizations outside the US are not eligible? No, you are eligible, but you must demonstrate in your application that any positive results from your intervention would be equally applicable in the US system, that your health system, your reimbursement system wouldn't invalidate the results you've collected when applied into the US. Our investigations that explore the acceptability of new tools to prevent diagnostic error acceptable. Again, as long as you are doing an intervention, as long as it is, you have some baseline data, you are testing whether that intervention improves the process, you are able to make adaptations in how you've implemented it in order to improve its use in the system, that sounds like it would fit. If a system sounds like a proposal that targets one but not all of the big three would count there, is that correct? Yes, it does not have to be all three equally. It could be a single disease. If you go to the FAQs, you will actually see a chart that reviews causal factors for the big three from malpractice claims. You'll see differences in the settings. We know that vascular events and infections tend to hit hospital settings more, whereas cancer misdiagnosis tends to be more in ambulatory. We do not expect that you are having an intervention that will equally affect all three. It still qualifies if you are after one of the categories, and it could be one major disease in the category. Can it be listed for two categories? Absolutely, if it fits, such as cancer and disparities, absolutely it can. To confirm the question about indirects, they need to be factored into the $50,000 budget. Yes, you can use any amount you want for indirects, including zero, but the total cannot exceed $50,000. And is FTE support a valid use? Absolutely. If you are buying protected time for people with the funds, that is absolutely a valuable use. Some proposals may not come to a conclusion within the one-year period, especially if it impacts patient outcomes. Yes, you may need to look at intermediate outcomes, more process-oriented outcomes than we would like. 1 year is not a long time, but I think it's really important that you try to make the connection between the process and the patient outcome to show how they would map to the other than in your application. If an application is close to being qualified accepted, will there be an opportunity to fix any defects? No, there will not. Now, by going through this multi-phase process, we could start out with a couple hundred, because sites can submit more than one. I would say it's not likely that we would issue more than one grant to a single system or site, but it's theoretically possible. So we expect and hope to have a fair number to choose from, and then we will whittle it down through the various cycles. So the grant review committee that Deanna referenced will only get the 30 finalists from which they will choose the 20. And because of that, we expect these things that are a little off probably not even to make it to the final category anyway. But it's really important. We just don't have the time in this cycle to allow for corrections and changes. You will have to make sure it's as good as you can do to ensure it gets considered properly. Question about what does it mean, no external funding? External means external to the system. As Deanna said, we're not looking to be a small supplement to a foundation's grant or a federally funded grant, absolutely in-kind support from within your system is not only allowable, it's probably assumed, because $50,000 isn't a lot of money. We understand that, and you don't have to capture everything. So in-kind support is certainly, or even if you call it cash in your system, but from within internal seed grant programs or things like that, that's okay. The travel expenses are part that Deanna described coming to the meeting at our Diagnostic Air Conference. Those budget expenses are shown as and are built into the application process. So your actual net might be only 45 or 46 of the 50,000 because we've built in some defaults. You can edit those defaults if you think it's overly generous on what will be required, or if you want to put more people into the travel budget, you can certainly do that. If applying for a multi-site study, can both sites apply for the full amount? If it's a single study, it's one grant award. No matter how many sites, multiple sites could not separately apply for a single quality improvement intervention. Does the project need to be completed by May of 2021? Yeah, pretty darn close. There may be a little bit of ability to do a no-cost extension for a short time, but we would frown probably on applications that say we'll get the results in after the second year. It really takes 2 years. So this is designed not to be, again, heavy-duty research, but quality improvement, and each phase, each PDSA cycle is collecting data. So in each PDSA cycle, you can report that out. So we are expecting to have this largely complete within the 12 months. Let's see, 12, we've already talked about indirects. Can you clarify again the required relationship with an academic medical center? There is no required relationship to an academic medical center. There is a required relationship to some kind of a place, whether it be a clinic, whether it be a physician office, whether it be a hospital, someone where the care is being delivered needs to be involved. Beyond that, there are no requirements. Are we going to get reviewer comments so that we can resubmit next year? The first cut from, it could be 200 applicants, we have no idea, down to 60 will not receive reviewer comments. After that, the next 30 will receive at least their scores by category. And then the final 30, the 20 will get awarded, the 10 who don't will actually get reviewer comments. So we're trying to do what we can. Can a project with disparate populations involve Medicaid rules or policy? You would have to explain that more in your application. The key issue is it a valid test of your intervention? Is it, although we're not trying to create necessarily generalizable knowledge, are we going to learn something that other people might also learn from? If it's too narrow and has very little applicability, and you should be discussing applicability in your application, then it would be unlikely that we would do. There was a question about, do you need a federally approved rate to ask for 12.5%? No, since it doesn't affect the total awarded, you can specify anything you want between 0 and 12.5%, and that's okay. It just doesn't change the total. The total cannot exceed $50,000. Is PDSA required? No, PDSA is not required. It's certainly a valid way to improve and to collect data through multiple cycles. There could be other approaches that people take involving Lean or Six Sigma approaches or other tools that are perfectly valid. You just need to be able to talk about your methodology. Deanna, remind me, you should unmute yourself. What are those lab questions you want me to answer? Can you quick read them out?
Just 1 second, let me get those up. Maybe you want to take a few more questions while I get those up, Paul?
Okay. The word count on the submission is quite short. Can you include appendix attachments with diagrams? What we're trying to do is make this not too burdensome, recognizing the $50,000 limit. So they are intended to be simple, and you know, I'm reminded of the quote from Blaise Pascal, who said, "Sorry, this letter is so long, but I didn't have enough time to make it shorter." So yes, you will have to be careful in your wording. There, at this point, we are not looking for appendix attachments. And I think we may learn a lesson in the first year if it turns out that the word counts we allotted are just too short. Maybe they will open up next year. This is our first year at that, but everyone's going to have the same constraint. So we're not going to go to appendices. Is a budget for acquisition of EHR data that is a part of a study allowed? Sure, there's no problem, that would be allowed. Will projects outside the US be considered? I think we've answered that multiple times, and that's also answered in the FAQ. Study method, would a quasi-experimental pre-post type design be disqualified as research than QI? If it fits the other requirements and ultimately helps us find a quality improvement intervention that is meaningful, can work elsewhere, no, that wouldn't disqualify it. Will it get greater points in the scoring mechanism? I don't think it will necessarily enhance it. We are looking for methodology, and there will be a scoring around methods. The methods do need to be able to show that we are learning something and we are and that we are improving quality. So however you address that, you need to address it anyway.
So Paul, I think I'm ready with my lab question now for you.
Okay.
Essentially, the core of the question is, what is the role of medical laboratory results and laboratory error in diagnosis and misdiagnosis? Would patient misdiagnosis decrease with decreased laboratory error?
So I'm not going to address that. That's way too specific. I can tell you that I've published on that. Other people have published on that. Certainly lab, whether it be imaging, whether it be clinical or anatomic pathology, whether it be electrophysiology testing, they all are inputs into a diagnostic process. So addressing those issues is certainly a valid approach to improving quality of diagnosis and is eligible. Beyond that, I don't think the literature is the better place for you to go. Are there any other questions? Okay, I think we hit everything that's in the chat box. Again, if your question didn't get answered, or if you have more questions that come up, you have until the 26th to submit them. We will then do an update to the FAQ to make sure everyone has access to the questions and the answers, again, for a level playing field. One last minute to see if we have any questions. If not, we're actually going to give you 3 minutes back into your agenda, into your day. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. Hope this was informative. We're looking very forward to the applications as they come in. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.